Good afternoon and welcome back to my channel, Daughter Arise. Hope that you are all well today. I'm doing okay, just been enjoying this lovely Friday afternoon down here in South London. The weather's been really nice, so I put on my sunnies, went out, had a coffee, had some breakfast, and took some me time. I think that's one of the things that I've learned to do much more over the years is to take some me time. I work quite hard, whether that is in my other kind of pursuits or with Daughter Arise, and it really is important to be able to have that time to just replenish and relax. And I've been able to do that in part today a bit, and I've just found it just to be really kind of helpful in everything that I want to do, because you have to be able to relax to be able to recharge your batteries. So that's what I've spent the first part of the day doing. So I wanted to come to you today with this video, and it's about living with shame. Now, if you watched my other two videos on this living with series that I'm doing, it's all about common experiences that survivors of childhood sexual abuse have experienced. Whether they've disclosed early on, which not a lot have, but a lot have disclosed later on in life. And the experiences that a lot of us have had, whether it was early on or later on, is that things like living with rejection, living with injustice, and now today living with shame are common threads that we have through our experiences. And this is from people that I have worked with and supported over the last nearly 7 years with Daughter Arise, people who I know that are friends, who are colleagues, people who I came up in the care system with. It's all about, we've had these experiences and these are things that really affected us. So if you haven't checked out my other videos, I did living with injustice, living with rejection, and that is talking about some of my experiences and things that could possibly maybe help you to be able to successfully or take steps to be able to move on from those certain issues. So today's about living with shame, and this is something that I find to be quite difficult, because I realised through my experiences of being sexually abused as a child, and I want to warn you again here, because I feel it is important that I do talk a little bit about my story. And if you're somebody who's been through sexual abuse, you may want to watch with caution, or maybe not watch at this time if you don't feel that you're up to it. I don't go into graphic detail about my sexual abuse. I never have. I didn't do that in my book. I don't do that in my videos. But I do feel it is important for me to talk about it, because so many people are suffering in silence. And unless we address the white elephant in the room, which is sexual abuse and the way that it is talked about, a lot of people won't get it. They won't understand it. It is important for me to be honest about my experience and what in part that entailed, so people understand that I don't have no shame about talking about it. That's one area where I feel like I don't have any shame, and I don't feel that I should have shame, is talking about what has happened to me, because I've done nothing wrong and you've done nothing wrong. So that is why I feel it's important to talk about it in its entirety, in a way that is sensitive and considerate, but also as well, hard hitting with the facts. So it's important for me to tell you that I do talk about my experience. One of the things that I've struggled with shame, not about in relation to talking about it, but I feel that I can be quite condemning about myself, just because I've come from that thing where shame has beaten me over the head for so long. For a lot of years I carried shame, and it was one of the factors that led to me having a nervous breakdown in my early 20s. I first recognised the seed of shame being sown immediately after the sexual abuse started to happen to me at 9 years old. In that moment of that first act, what my dad had done was to sow a seed of feeling dirty. I felt like I was dirty, and I felt like something was wrong with me because I didn't see it happening to my brother or sister. They weren't going through the abuse. So I immediately became this shame-based child where I felt that I was the problem, that I was the issue, because I couldn't understand why this was happening to me. And my mindset isn't how it is now. I had a mindset of a child. I didn't know nothing about sex. I didn't know nothing about sexual abuse. All I know was that this thing was making me feel really bad about myself and confused about myself. There were things that happened during the abuse, and I talked about this briefly in one of my very, very early videos about I was invited, and it was something I never talked about before because, again, I felt ashamed about it. But I remember a little while ago, and I talked about it in one of my earlier videos briefly. I was interviewed on a BBC interview program, and the BBC would contact me quite often to ask ask for my views on certain news stories that were breaking around the time to do with sexual abuse, and ask for my insight. So I was invited to speak on this breakfast show, and just off the cuff, she asked me about if my body had orgasms and stuff like that, or sexually responded to the abuse. And I remember at the time feeling quite taken aback, actually, and her way of questioning, actually, I thought was quite very kind of journalistic. Like, it was kind of, I felt a little bit looking for it to be sensationalized, and nobody had ever asked me that question during the interview, and I was aware that now how I responded because I was live on air. And for the first time I had to admit that my body did respond to the abuse. Not, and I don't want to I don't want to say about orgasms and things like that, but my body at that age responded how a body would do to stimulus of that type. And that is something that kept me in shame for so many years, because I thought that because my body responded like that, and that must mean that I enjoyed it, because the stimulus felt it felt not enjoyable, but it felt my body responded in a way that it would do to that type of behavior. And I felt really ashamed of that for a long time, right up until I had my when I had my first breakdown at 22 years old. In that moment when she asked me that question, I did feel a bit embarrassed and a bit taken aback. But when I came off that interview, I found it quite freeing after a few days. It took me a little while to process it because I felt that it could have been handled better. But actually, it was just another prison door that was open in relation to my experience. And believe it or not, it's not something I really dealt with after I had my first breakdown at 22 and I was in psychotherapy. It wasn't something that I really talked about in there. I talked about the abuse and what that entailed, but that type of feeling, because it felt almost condemning. And if you're somebody who has had that, where your body responded to that doesn't mean that you enjoyed it. Our bodies are designed for a certain way, and unfortunately for a lot of us, we were false ripes before our time, meaning that our bodies were introduced to things that were not supposed to be for that time. My whole experience of that was that I was supposed to be in a loving relationship with somebody and having these type of feelings and all this type of stuff. So that was one of the things that kept me to be a shame-based person. It fed into a lot of my self-esteem issues. It made me depressed. I felt like that I was wrong. I felt that I did something wrong. And it caused me to hide myself for a long time. Living with shame and secrecy can breed all kinds of things. It breeds the mask that a lot of survivors put on to wear. I used to wear the mask a lot, meaning that when I was in front of other people, I'd be all happy and jokey and all this type of stuff. But when I was behind closed doors, it was a completely different thing. I presented myself to the world in one way, and behind closed doors, I was another way. Another thing that shame brought was this people-pleasing thing, you know, because again, because I had this shame about myself and didn't understand why I felt shame about myself, I again was picking up that kind of thing of, if only I would be this type of person, that type of person, and be a people pleaser, that would get rid of the shame, but it didn't get rid of it. The shame of having to live with the secret was that it affected everything that I did, affected my whole being. Living with shame, it eroded my ability to know myself, and how I viewed myself. I didn't have a good opinion of myself. And it's crazy to think that all of this I was carrying was from the fact that my dad had done this act to me. I was living with the shame, the blame of it, whilst he lives his life and was living his life. Because that's one of the things that I've come to understand about, you know, I've been on this journey for 32 years. So it's been a process to be able to come to you and talk to you like this. And, you know, one of the things that I realise is that while I was living with the shame and the guilt and the blame of what his actions done to me, he was living his life. And the worst thing about it, he didn't think that he had done anything wrong, because as I've said, I confronted him at 21 years old and looked him in his eye and confronted him about what he'd done. And he never thought he did anything wrong. But I understand the mindset now of somebody like that, because it's about the values and morals that he also was brought up with. And again, you know, it's about him making that decision to do what he'd done to me. The same way the person who has done what they've done to you, they've made the decision to do it. And it has nothing to do with you. Living with the prison, in the prison of shame, living with the secrecy, confined in isolation, broken in the silence. Some of its effects, some of the things that some people say that they experience is that they feel dirty, like I mentioned. They feel tarnished. They feel that they had done something wrong. Thoughts of, if people only really knew the real me, if they only really knew, you know, what I'd done. This is the shame that is talking. This is not you. This is the shame that the perpetrator, the person who abused you, has put on you. It develops and breeds those thoughts. But I want you to know, the shame belongs to them. It doesn't belong to you. Just like that, what my dad did to me, it doesn't belong to me. It belongs to him and him only. The shame made me feel, and how it affected me, was in my mental health. That was one of the number one areas it affected me. Because when things can affect you from your mental health, from your spirit, from your soul, from your mindset, it then branches out into everything else that you put out. So with the people pleasing, the isolation, it all stemmed from the mental health issues that I had, which was anxiety, depression, as I said, low self-esteem, low value of myself, feeling I was dirty, only good for the trash. And then how that kind of manifested was that, the self-harming. I started self-harming at 14 years old. That is where I would self-harm with razors, engage in risky behaviours, all these different types of things that I was doing. But I kept a wall really high around me, because I didn't want people to come too close to me, because I was scared that if they saw the real me, then they would turn away. And again, you know, that fed into the whole rejection thing. One of the number one reasons that survivors process shame the way that they do is because they're looking at it from the mindset of how they are now. Because as adults, we have a different mindset to when we are children. So I look back, for instance, and said, I used to look back and say, well, if only I did this, if only I did that, and I would analyse the situation. But at 9 years old, I don't have that mind. All I have is a mind of a child who's trusting, who just wants to be loved. And you have people around you who you trust and love, and you expect them to love and protect you, and then they've done that to you. So how am I supposed to process that? And I don't think it's fair. And I'm saying this to you, I don't think it's fair that you should blame yourself or analyse or critique your experience from where you are today now, because it is doing injustice to yourself. There is no way that you, whatever age you were when this abuse was happening to you, could have stopped that abuse. It doesn't matter, you know, if you, because that's another thing I used to think as well. Oh, if I wasn't such a, because I had, you know, a personality where I could be quite shy around new people, but around my family I was really jokey, always the first one up dancing at Christmas, always the first one joking about, and even innocent things like that, like my personality, I took that apart and thought to myself, you know, if only I wasn't such a kind of happy, kind of like a jokey child, if only I wasn't kind of, you know, always such a fun loving child, maybe then my dad wouldn't have drawn attention to myself, and that my dad wouldn't have, you know, abused me, because maybe because I was like that, that is why he abused me, because that drew attention to myself. How can my personality, how can I put all this weight on myself? It doesn't matter what I did. Whether I was right, where I could have been running around the house naked at 9. That still didn't give my dad the right to do what he did to me. That still doesn't give the right for the person who's done what they've done to you to do it. No behaviour of a child can ever be responsible for the choices of an adult. I need you to understand that, and I need you to take a minute to take that in. Think about it. What could you have done at whatever age you were to stop this adult who's stronger in power than you physically, stronger and more stronger in power mentally than you? How could you have stopped your abuse? The answer is you couldn't. Same way I couldn't. My dad alone is responsible for his actions. I take no responsibility for his actions, no responsibility for how my body responded, no responsibility for any of the things that I had to go through in the aftermath because of his one decision. I'm not to blame for it, and I refuse to live in shame. I refuse to live in shame. He should be ashamed. He should be ashamed of what he had done to what he's done to me, not me. And I can talk about it from a place now of being, as I said, it's been a process of being healed. Doesn't mean I still don't that it still doesn't affect me, but I don't have shame about my experience anymore. It tries to visit itself on me in other thought forms. You know, like, again, shame brings that whole thing of being hard on yourself, and that is what I believe we do. If you're one of those people who have been through it, where you will look back on an experience and judge yourself and critique yourself from the mindset of an adult on you as a child, you're being hard on yourself. And I would encourage you, you know, to not be hard on yourself, because you've done nothing wrong. There is no amount of behaviour a child could do that could be responsible for the actions of an adult. No matter what somebody has told you, no matter what people may have said to you, you might have tried to speak out and people are saying, well, if you weren't so flighty, that's what somebody said to somebody. Oh, if only you weren't so flighty, meaning if you weren't so fun-loving or whatever. Oh, if you weren't walking around in your nightdress. What has that got to do with anything? As I said, I could be walking around naked, running around naked as a child. Does that give you a right as an adult to sexually abuse me? No, it doesn't. And it doesn't give them the right to do it to you. So how do you break out the prison of shame? It is totally unjust. How I broke out of it was by speaking about it. I was forced to speak about it in the sense of I had spent so many years pushing down inside me everything to do with it, repressing memories, avoidance, isolation, that I just became overwhelmed emotionally inside. My mind, my soul could no longer carry the burden of such a weight. The mask became too heavy. The shame became too hard to bear. And this living in the prison of secrecy and silence, that solitary confinement, that self-imposed solitary confinement that started at 9 years old, when that very first act was done, became just too much to bear. I was forced to speak about it because when I had the breakdown, I was actually forced now to deal with everything that was coming up. The brokenness that I felt inside myself. The disappointment that I felt at my parents. Trying to again find out who I was for the first time. Because I never had that opportunity. And I did that, as I said, after I came out of hospital, I was on medication, broken, in psychotherapy, broken, like pieces of a puzzle all over the floor. Was my life, was everything about me was fragmented. And I had to deal with the shame. I had to speak about my truth, what had happened to me. And in doing that, it was hard. It was really hard. It was one of the hardest things I ever done. Taking that first step to voicing it is the hardest step you will ever take. Because I know how hard it is when you've had your trust broken, because the ultimate betrayal is in being sexually abused, and having that trust, that betrayal, and having that relationship broken, feeling that you'll never trust again. But there's ways that you can have a controlled trust. And what I mean by that is speaking to people who are bound by confidentiality. I.e., for me, I went and I did psychotherapy. And, part of that client relationship was it was confidential unless I was at risk of harming myself or harming other people. Everything that was talked about in those sessions was confidential. And over a time of getting to know her and talk to her, she was such a nice lady, and I still remember her. I was able to kind of build a relationship with her and open up to her bit by bit. It didn't happen overnight, but that was what I was able to do. And I was, in the first time round, because I have been in and out of counselling or therapy, or I've had different types of things since the age of 13 years old. But in 22, after I had the breakdown and I was in this relationship with her, in terms of a client relationship, for 2 years I was able to just pour out to her and admit some of the things that kept me in shame. Another thing that I found helpful, again, sometimes in some of my videos I try and give you some really easy options to be able to start that process, because it is about starting the process. You might not feel ready to start going counselling at the moment, in any shape, way or form, but just starting wherever it is to kind of break the shame. The number one thing that will break the shame and bring light into that darkness is talking about it. You could call a helpline like Samaritans or an equivalent wherever you are in the world, and just talk to that person. You can even give a different name if you want to, and you could just talk, knowing that you're having this conversation with this person, you will never see this person again, but you voiced what's happened to you as a child. I think these things are important. Journaling and writing things down is important, because that in itself is kind of acknowledging what has happened to you. But to be able to voice it to somebody, in what I have said is these controlled trust relationships, which are bound by confidentiality, which give you a bit of kind of, you know, exclusivity in terms of, you know, you can share as much as you want and not feel like, you know, you're going to be exposed or whatever it is. You know, these type of relationships are good. Another relationship that you may want to look at is if you have a trusted friend or you have somebody that you trust in your life. But I will leave that for you to decide, because only you will know how they can deal with that type of information. Again, you know, they might not be able to understand what you have been through. And unless they've been through it themselves, that's just honest. So you might not get the response that you want from that. But if they're a person who you know that is compassionate and has empathy, you may want to share a little bit with them, as long as you trust them. Because I think in order to speak about things that have caused you to feel shame, you have to do it with somebody that you can trust. So those are just a few of the options. All I want to say to you is, don't blame yourself for what has happened to you or how your body responded or anything like that. I know that it's very hard for people who have been through sexual abuse to open up and talk to somebody. I know people who have opened up and tried to tell their family and friends, and they've been blamed for something that they had no control over, while the perpetrator, it sickens me, I'm sorry. It sickens me to know that people who do this crime just go through life, just going from place to place, doing it, you know, being protected by the family because they have a good name, or the family don't want to bring shame on themselves. But you were left as a child to suffer this. It is not your fault. You are not to blame. The shame belongs to the person who has done this to you. Give it back. And you will need help to be able to give it back. I've given it back. I've given the shame back to my dad. It's yours to carry. And it doesn't matter if you acknowledge it or not, it's yours. I'm not carrying your trash anymore. I'm not carrying your trash. It's your trash. You behaved like trash and it's your trash. And you must carry the stink of it. You carry it, not me. Because I'm reclaiming my life. And I hope one day you'll be able to reclaim yours. Whatever seeds that have been sown, however they've come about to make you feel ashamed of yourself, my prayer for you is that they will just be eradicated from your life. And as I said, it's a process to get rid of shame. It's like washing a stench off of you. And it might take a bit of time. That's what it's like. It's like a stench. Shame is not your friend. Neither is the prison of secrecy and silence that it tries to confine you in. Because the same prison of secrecy that you are living in is the same prison of secrecy that is going to condemn and accuse you. How do I know? Because I've lived it. That's how I know. You may think the prison of isolation is protecting you and keeping you, and it may be for a while, but in the very same breath, in the very same instance, it is condemning and accusing you and keeping you away from rebuilding your life. So I want to encourage you today, however you would like to get help, to get the help that you need. If you want to reach out to me, I can be found at Daughter Arise, which is www.daughterarise.org.uk, or you can check out the website for Daughter Arise, see what we're about. If you want to personally email me, you can email me at info@daughterarise.org.uk. I may be able to try and source some, if you want to try and find out where you can find help, I may be able to try and source some avenues in your area where you can possibly access help or a helpline of some sort. it is important just to make that one step to find your voice. That one hard step. It's hard. And another thing, it comes at a cost a lot of the time. As I said, a lot of people who try to speak out and voice it, you know, have been condemned for it. And then what has happened in that moment when they stepped out, they've decided never to do it again. And the shame then becomes the weight that they carry. It may come at a cost for you to find your voice, but a safe way to find your voice at this point, as I said, with the avenues that I've mentioned, whether that is counselling, therapy, helplines, controlled relationships where you can find that trust. Whatever way you do it, however you do it, I ask you today, please consider to do it, because in living in shame and blaming yourself for something that had nothing to do with you, blaming yourself as a child for the actions of an adult, you are robbing yourself of life. The life that you want to live, not controlled by a fear, not controlled by actions of your past, robbing you of the ability to want to have good relationships because you think that maybe, I don't know, sex is dirty because your body had reacted a certain way. And that feeling from a child or wherever has carried with you to today, robbing you of the ability to have proper relationships. I pray that the wounds that have been inflicted on you will be healed and that you will find peace. God gives peace. You know, the living God, he comes to give us peace. His plans towards us are of peace. That's what it says in his word, the Bible. You know, he wants to come and give you peace. He wants to lift the burden of shame off of you that you've been carrying, that has eroded your soul. So today, that is my encouragement to you. Will you take one step out of the darkness and try and let somebody know what has happened to you? I want you to be able to find your voice, because it is in finding your voice that will be the first step to freedom and to you walking towards the light. So that is it for today. In either corner you will see the Daughter Riot's logo. Please subscribe to this channel. Again, thank you to all of you who have subscribed to this channel. I'm really feeling encouraged by your support. But if you want to subscribe to my channel, please do, and you will get notification of these videos. You can turn that on in your notifications on your YouTube account settings. Also in the other corner, you may see a video that you haven't seen before. Please do check it out. Please share these videos, and if you know anybody that has been through it, encourage them to find their voice. You know, you might not have been through it. You might be watching this video out of interest. But as I said, and what I've said before, is that just having the ability to listen can heal a whole range of things. A lot of people who've been through it have never had anybody listen to them without judging them, criticising, reacting. Sometimes just listening can really help. So thank you for watching today, and I will see you on the next video.